Well, we totally skipped that. Hello, everyone. I'm Robert, and welcome to Skeptic Philosophy. Today, we're doing a show with Mr. Austin Sims. I think this is the first time we've talked before, but this is the first time that he's been on the channel. I'd like to give him a moment to introduce himself and say what he is, what he does, and his interest in the subject matter at hand.
Hey, everybody. My name's Austin Sims. I'm a college science student studying biology, but also studying a little bit of everything. I study, anthropology, archaeology. I've even been dipping my toes into volcanology a little bit, and just a little bit of everything. I love science, and I got interested in science through evolution. When I was very young, I was forced to be a young Earth creationist by some of my family members and the culture I was living in. I lived in a Southern Baptist community in Texas, and so I was pretty much forced to be a young Earth creationist by that community. And then when I moved out of that community to Michigan, I started getting more of a quality science education and started to realize all the ways that young Earth is especially devastatingly wrong. There's no way that the planet is young. It's very ancient. But I also started to realize that creationism is wrong too, that evolution is real. Evolution did happen, and evolution is the source for all the biodiversity we have on this planet. So I started getting more involved in conversations about it online, and I discovered this whole network of misinformation that goes beyond just evolution denial. There's flat Earth, and there's Holocaust denial, and there's American Civil War history revisionism. Then there's all these sources of misinformation, and so it has become my personal mission to try and add some good information to the overwhelming glut of bad information that's out there, which is something we all should be doing. We all should be doing our part to try and counter misinformation, disinformation, and pseudoscientific, pseudo-archaeological narratives, and spreading good education and good philosophy and good thinking. So I'm very happy to be here on the Skeptic Philosophy channel. Robert has been about it, and so I'm happy to help.
Appreciate it, man. And I thank you for stopping by. Today, we're going to be talking about a few different subjects here in evolution. I myself don't have a history in evolution or in the subject of biology. I brought Mr. Austin in here because he is more knowledgeable in it. I can try to keep up with just about anybody on a subject, but I'm fixing to be from the outside looking in. There's no doubt about it. That having been said, I did put together some PowerPoints, and we'll be going through a little bit of the subject, but we're going to go ahead and put this on the board. What we're talking about today is evolution, vestigial traits, and atavisms. And is there any particular one that you're interested in, or do you want to talk about, or did you want to just
let's start off by talking about the foundations a little bit. Let's define some terms. So first, science. What is science? For science, what it really is it's a method for thinking in a structured way. It's a method for exploring the world by formulating quantifiable, falsifiable, possible solutions to unanswered questions and unsolved problems in our attempts to study and better understand the universe. And the reason we do it is to take what we learn and use it to better human existence. And so science doesn't make the proclamation that everything it says about the world is perfectly correct. It just says that we have a model, we've collected as much of the evidence as we can, and we're continuing to collect it. And so far, all the evidence we've found supports that model, or the model it was possible for us to alter the model such that the evidence still fit it. And so what science is ultimately is it's an attempt to try and disprove your own ideas. People think science is about proving things. It is, but only in a roundabout, indirect way. It's actually about disproving your ideas. And if you fail to disprove them, they become what's called a theory. And so over the last 150 plus years, everybody, all of the most intelligent and knowledgeable people have tried to find some way to falsify evolution, and we failed every time. And as such, evolution has been awarded the scientific gold standard status of a scientific theory. So that's what science is. That's what theory is. Evolution. What is evolution? Evolution is the change in heritable characteristics of populations of living organisms over time and over generational time. And what that means is that each generation is a little bit different than the generation that came before it, but is still basically the same species. But if you zoom out and you look at that trend over tens of thousands of generations, or hundreds of thousands of generations, or millions of generations, the life forms you'll be looking at are much more different from each other than the direct offspring of one generation to the other. And what we think is that there is these micro processes. There's that generational adaptation, the fact that every generation looks a little bit different than the generation before it, but all those micro processes add up to all of the biodiversity on the planet by taking an ancestral population that we all share, we're all descendants of it, and diversifying it over time. So it starts off as one population, then it becomes two populations, then those two populations become two populations, and it forms this branching, bushy, tree-like structure that we refer to as the tree of life. And so that's evolution. And then vestigial traits and atavisms. These things are very cool, very strong evidence of evolution. A vestigial trait is a trait that was present in an ancestral body form and is still present in the descendant, but it no longer does the same purpose. It does an attenuated purpose, or it serves no purpose at all. It's just an evolutionary leftover. And atavisms are kind of a form of vestigial. They're just a less common one. It's something that happens usually in fetal development, where because the way you are built is it starts with your genes, and then your genes are expressed into what's called your phenotype. And sometimes it's possible for your genome, because a lot of the genetic sequences that built these ancestral body plans are still in your genome. Usually they're ignored and they're not expressed, or they're expressed and then they're absorbed by the rest of the body as it develops. Sometimes the process of converting a genotype into a phenotype expresses an ancestral form, and you end up with a human baby with a tail, or a dolphin with hind leg buds, like its ancestors would have had hind legs. It usually doesn't anymore, but sometimes it's possible for this to happen. And so that's what vestigial traits and atavisms are. So with all of that defined, hopefully that helps people understand what we're talking about as we get into this.
Absolutely. And there's one more category that I actually didn't put on here. And I'm sorry, I should probably looked up what it was named. We'll get into a little bit. And that's just the repurposing of, or obvious variations of, already known components inside that species, that there's an adaptation of them that now is serving a new purpose. And we'll get into probably a few of those, but I did not list it here. That having been said, we'll start with the slides on this. I did want to let everyone know I am using StreamYard here today. This is not the regular one that I use. I do use a different streamer. I use Restream, but we are going to be using StreamYard today just for the slideshow presentation, as well as it's easier for Mr. Austin to interact.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. First one that I wanted to mention, and it hits close to home, and that's the superfluous nipple, also known as the supernumerary nipple. This is something that shows up a lot. I think it shows up 1 in every 18 people. You see this. There is a whole list of actors that gets these. And if you Google these, there's tons of pictures of even actors or actresses that have these. Mark Wahlberg has a third nipple. Harry Styles has a third nipple. Tilda Swinton, Zac Efron. A lot of these are very prominently displayed. You'll see
I didn't
them on
know
their
any of
videos and on their
that.
pictures. Yes, Lily Allen, which is a British singer, famously pulled her superfluous nipple out on the Friday Project, and she showed her superfluous nipple. And then Carrie Underwood talked about hers in an interview that she had a superfluous nipple. So they're much more common than you think. In fact, though you will not be seeing the picture today, I myself do have a superfluous nipple or a supernumerary nipple myself. It is 1 in 18 people. Mine's not as well defined as many people, but like you can look at pictures of Mark Wahlberg back in his Marky Mark days even, and you can see he's rocking a superfluous nipple. They almost always occur closest to the heart. And the one that you see in the image is the one that does most commonly occur. However, there are all along the points that you see on the milk line, they can occur. And my understanding of these nipples is the milk line disappears, and we could always move back or forward. But the milk line that we have when we're a fetus, it slowly winds up disappearing before we're born. And any nipple that we have, any third nipple or fourth nipple, because you can get them all along these lines, they will wind up they're there. People just don't discover them until much later. People think that they're a mole, or they think that they're something else. But they're always exactly along the milk line. And they do happen in the skin surface only. So when you look at these deeper skin tissue or beyond skin tissue looks, you do not see the milk line. It only shows up inside of the skin when you have this shows up in mammals. I'm going to flip one more to this one. So this one is a squirrel. This is a baby squirrel that was born premature, and you can see, hopefully you can see my cursor. I don't know if it's able to show my cursor or not. Does it show my cursor or no?
No, it's not showing.
That's unfortunately. Well, you'll see what looks like two little veins that run in the same line of this milk line here. And those two veins you'll see show up that go from underneath the arm and they go down towards genitalia. You'll see two tiny veins. This is the milk line. It's showing up. It only shows up in the skin surface. And nipples can develop along this milk line. This is where they'll develop specifically. And the genes that make this show up, I'm sorry, I actually did have the name of the genes written somewhere here. I'm not highly familiar with the gene sections here. But anyway, yeah. So these are only in mammals, and they're one mammal that they're not is the genus that the like the platypus belongs to.
The echidnapus.
Monotrims. Monotrims. So the monotrims, they are technically a mammal, but they don't have these milk lines. Other than monotrims, everything has the milk lines, and this is where cats, dogs, all of the nipples would show up along these milk lines. Whereas humans, obviously, we generally only have the two, both male and female. They both show up the two nipples, but from time to time we do have the superfluous or the supernumerous nipple will show up. And if you look up supernumerous nipples online, you'll find some that are more than just that highly prominent third nipple that happens close to the heart. You'll see fourth or fifth nipples will sometimes show up, but they will always be along this milk line section.
Yes. So you've had yours from birth, correct?
Yes. Didn't know about it till much longer. Always thought it was a mole.
So what I'm guessing is happening there, and this is common among atavisms when we were talking about a little bit earlier, the way you develop, the way you are built as a living organism is you start off as a cluster of cells. And parts of that cluster of cells are told develop, and other parts are told stop developing. The part where they're told to stop developing, that's called apoptosis. and it is basically just a controlled form of cell death. Literally, when a cell isn't growing, it's dying. So when those cells are told stop growing, it's basically cellular death. And what that allows is it allows for the rest of the body plan to absorb those parts that were told to stop growing. Like, we all start off with tails in womb, but usually you end up absorbing the part of you that would become a tail as the rest of your body develops, and apoptosis tells it to stop developing. In this case, either apoptosis didn't tell that part of your cells to stop developing, or the rest of the body plan just failed to absorb it. And so as a result, you end up with this superfluous nipple, or with a human with a tail. And both are fascinating examples of humans bearing the traits of an ancestral form. Really strong evidence of evolution.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. This is not something that gets incorporated into design. So
No,
it's just
no.
it's not something that.
Well, yeah. Why would God be throwing random nipples with no? I mean, male nipples are already kind of useless, but to add extra ones on, yeah,
yeah, for sure. The other one is getting into the goosebumps, and I'll flip back to the cat one in a moment. The cat, and I don't know how much you're familiar with this tiny muscle that winds up pushing the hair up straight. On the Wikipedia page from this is actually originally an animation. Whoops, went one too far. That shows this muscle expanding, and the number 2 column expands and stands the hairs up, and this happens whenever we're either afraid, if we're frightened, or if we're cold. It winds up standing these up. And this is very advantageous in many different animals, such as the cat, where this is a scared kitten, and we wind up getting all of the hairs, as you'll see on the kitten, they all stand straight up. And we've seen that this is helpful for making a cat or making any of the animals look like they're larger, but it also winds up trapping more air inside, and it helps with insulation. So when somebody's freezing and they get these goosebumps, what they're getting is these muscles are contracting, they're getting tight, and they are standing up these hairs inside of her body, and we see the hairs stand up on your arm, or they stand up on the back of your neck. All of this is because you're either cold or afraid, and it was once upon a time very, very useful when we had a lot more hair than we do now, but they're not very useful anymore.
Yeah, so this is the atavism that I think most people know about. Most people learn about goosebumps and why they happen, and how goosebumps in us, it's different from other more hairy animals. And there's actually a couple of different human atavisms that have to do with hair, or vestigials rather. For instance, your eyebrows are mostly vestigial. They are too thin now to really do anything, but they used to be much thicker. And the idea is that when they were thicker, they were better. They had better usage in terms of keeping dirt or sweat or other obstructions from running into your eyes. So all kinds of hair on the human body is vestigial and no longer does the original purpose that it did. I think it still serves some kind of purpose. That's one of the things with vestigials that needs to be cleared up often. People tend to think that a vestigial means that a feature is now completely useless, and that is not necessarily the case. You might still be able to get some use out of something, but the use will be attenuated, or it'll be different from what the feature was used for in an ancestral form.
Absolutely. It's actually why I did not put probably the most famous of all vestigial structures on here, which is the appendix. It's actually not listed in here. We could talk about the subject, but it's one of the reasons, because there are some studies on the subject that says that, especially in early childhood, that it might have some use as far as processing bacteria or infections or whatnot. But it doesn't seem to be high. I mean, we cut it out all the time, and it's not a problem to cut it out. And the mortality rate obviously now isn't a problem, but it used to be a significant problem. The appendix, they would rupture. I think as much as 10% of people would have an appendix rupture, and as high as 30% of people that had that appendix rupture would not live through it. They would die. So
Yeah.
you do have some decent success, like 70% could still live through a ruptured appendix. But I mean, it was very fatal, and any benefit that the appendix could have had, it just doesn't seem like it was worth having the appendix.
Yep. And the tonsils were in kind of the same category.
Yep.
And one of the things about vestigials is a feature doesn't have to be useful for the entire life cycle of the organism. Lots of
Sure.
organisms have features that only are useful during embryological development, or that are only useful in infancy, and then they change over time as the organism develops, or they go dormant and inert and inactive. So it's possible that your appendix or your tonsils, that they do something at some point, and then by the time you're an adult and you're mature, that they're basically inactive and you don't really need them anymore.
For sure. And that happens a lot. This one doesn't happen a lot. This is a
No.
very rare occurrence of the
Yes.
tail. And my understanding is that this happens in the gene section known as TBXT gene section. And this is, I understand that it's in all of us, but it's not active in all of us. This does generally connect some muscle structures back to the coccyx. I don't think that it always does. Maybe you know more about the subject of the human tail and how often it arises.
I don't know about that specific matter, but I do know the gene segment that you were talking about is the same gene segment that develops tails in other primate
Yeah,
species,
absolutely.
which is fascinating.
Yeah, that's immediately what I found. It's the exact same gene structure. It happens in humans and it happens in primates. It's I don't know how the dormantness of genes works, but every once in a while we'll get active genes or partially active genes on this subject in humans, and they'll subsequently have a tail, and it's generally has to be removed.
Yeah.
But
yes. So it's fascinating to me because it's such a strong sign of human primate common ancestry.
sure.
People who deny evolution will often ask, "Oh, if we're monkeys, why don't we have tails?" Well, here's the
Sometimes
reason
we
why.
do.
Some of us do, actually. Yeah, it's a little more complicated than you thought. Yeah.
Absolutely. This one gets into the coccyx, and which is where this winds up extending past functionality to some degree. I understand that we were talking about this earlier, some muscles I understand do attach to the coccyx at different places that we do use them somewhat. And even to some degree, sphincters do have muscles that wind up connecting to the coccyx as an anchor point. But this is what a structure that goes beyond our buttocks, and it has a few different matter of fact, I'll flip down to the next one. It has a few different sections in this that wind up fusing together the vertebrate. I think most humans, actually it's three to five vertebrates appear to be fused in most humans. After what the hell's the name of this at the top of the coccyx? I can't remember the name of it. It actually didn't have the name here. It just calls it a base, but there was a name. It started with an A. I forget what it's called. But anyway, we still see this in gorillas also, and they have slightly more, is my understanding. Whereas most of your primates, you have about the 3 to 5, whereas gorillas have about 4 to 6, with them ranging in the 5 to 6 area quite commonly. I think what's going on is when these fuse together, we're probably just making out. We're probably just able to make out, if you see the bottom of this coccyx, how many are fused together. But we see this a lot with like hands and wings, that there's a lot of bones that are fused to the degree that we can't really make out like how many bones were fused.
We see it in neck bones too.
Yeah.
So you can see how this structure is way more useful to an organism that has a tail. We can still get some kind of use out of it. It might help you sit a little more comfortably. You might be a little bit less comfortable if you tried to sit down without it. And there's some of the musculature can do things, but generally this structure would be way more useful to an organism that uses it as the structure that their tail moves with or is rooted to the skeletal system with. we still get some use out of it. And this is the case for a lot of vestigial features, especially skeletal ones. There's this in the tails in humans, and there's leg bones in cetaceans that are extremely attenuated. There's no way they'll ever be able to use those leg bones for support on land, which is what the ancestral body plan that had those leg bones used them for. But they've still been able to find some use for these leg bones in mating. And that's why some vestigial attenuated form of those leg bones persists in populations of those organisms today. The how it got there was the ancestor had it for a different reason, and why it stays there is because there's still some reason for
it. Darwin's notch is what I've always known this as since I had any knowledge of it. Some of this varies greatly in humans as to how well it shows up. A lot of these pictures, I pulled these because these are open source pictures, but we have a lot of these. I'm trying to think of the lady's name that is an actress that she has a very predominant one. I didn't want to put it on here. The lady Scarlett Johansson. Scarlett Johansson has a very dominant, pointed inbound in her ear. If you ever look at any pictures, you can see her notch is quite dominant. But this is something that was even written about in The Origin of Species. That was it was picked up in the drawing was from Mr. Woolner is all that is pointed out from here. But this notch was pointed out all the way back by Darwin. That this is a notch that seems to be very similar to the tips of monkey ears that are just folded in. There's no purpose for it. Obviously, it's just kind of vestigial.
Yeah, this is one of the true vestigials. I hope you can hear the air quotes in my voice there. It's a true vestigial in that we don't know if this does anything, or we think it's very unlikely that it doesn't do anything.
Yeah. I can't imagine anything that it could be useful for.
Yeah, it's
just a remnant.
It's very mild, so it would be hard to imagine it having a real impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Along with the ears, and I did have a slide originally of a donkey or rabbits and whatnot that I wound up removing, and I totally forgot to put something back in there. But many of you might notice that we have many animals that can move their ear all about, and as soon as they hear a sound, turn that ear. Humans do still have these muscles. There are 3 primary muscles that are here that they're able to move this with, and as they're listed, we still have them, but the average person cannot in any way, shape, or form move their ear with it.
Yeah, some people can wiggle their ears with them, and it's really it's actually kind of adorable to look at. I think it speaks to something in us, some innate love we have for mammalian babies, because some people can wiggle their ears, and it's adorable. The advantage to being able to move your ears is that you're able to direct your ears towards the area that a sound is coming from, so it can make you better at hearing. It can help you detect predators. Humans don't have to worry about predators as much anymore. We kind of removed ourselves from the environment where predators are a major concern. At least a lot of human populations have. Some human populations are still living in those kinds of areas, but for most of us, we don't really have to worry about pointing our ears at that bush that we just heard rattling like their satellite dishes. So there was an advantage to this at some time, but now it's mostly just kind of a cute little thing some people can do.
Some people can do. I don't know what the percentage is. Some of these, like we have different muscles in the back of the ankle and in the forearm that you'll have some muscles that up to 10 or 15% don't have those muscles. They don't develop at all. To my knowledge, all humans wind up having these muscles, but the amount that can wiggle their ears with it is quite slim. I don't know what the numbers are, but they're pretty slim. And even then, it's not advantageous to be able to.
I can move my ears a little bit, but I can't wiggle them. That's
right. Yeah.
Just
There's no advantage to it.
Yeah.
Anyway, getting into the subject of wisdom teeth. Wisdom teeth, I think, is a very interesting subject. And
Super
I pulled up
interesting.
something from a Wikipedia page on this that talks about the genes on this and the PAX9 being very influential on this. I
Mhm.
think what I read as much as 35% now don't have wisdom teeth.
Don't have them.
Right.
Yes.
There's some people. Well, first of all, we're getting impacted teeth constantly that are
Mhm.
they're getting problematic because the jaw is so much smaller now. But there are some peoples, such as the Aborigines, that their bloodline, if they're 100% bloodline, they will never fail to have wisdom teeth. It's just in their genes; they always have them at 100% rate.
Mhm.
Whereas some, such as the indigenous Mexicans, they never have the wisdom teeth. It does not happen in their genetics. So we have some genetic lineages that you have 100% occurrence and some that you have a 0% occurrence in the subject.
So you're absolutely right. It's super fascinating that we're watching humanity evolve to no longer have this trait. And that's largely because mandibular and dentary efficiency are one of the most powerful evolutionary selection pressures there are, because it contributes to the organism's ability to process nutrients, to acquire and process nutrients. So if you're better at it, you survive longer, you reproduce more. You can directly see how dentary and mandibular efficiency and usefulness creates this proliferation effect in future generations. If you inherit my superior dentary or mandibular structure, you are going to be in a better position because you're going to be able to eat a wider variety of nutrients. You're going to be able to get food, a larger variety of food sources. You're going to have an easier time processing it. It costs you less energy. Yes. And it's so fascinating that, and I know that like evolution deniers are like, oh wow, you're just losing a tooth. You're just losing things. No, this is evolving to make our body plan more efficient, less painful. It is quintessentially evolution. So I know that's not enough to satisfy an evolution denier, but for me, I'm like, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's definitely change. The cat dew claw. I thought this was an interesting one, the subject of dew claws,
Yeah, I
because we
don't know
have
about
these
this
in.
one.
Yeah, with cats, I understand the almost the entire feline species. This claw is still beneficial. They still use it in huntings. We see it in leopards. We see it in lions grabbing for prey. This claw is still active. It
Hmm.
does do something. However, when we see this in dogs, and even when we see it in wolves, it is not doing anything. It just hangs out. It's absolutely vestigial. It's not doing a thing in the world. And what's interesting is there's something going on in the genes in a lot of dogs where it's and I wish I had a picture in here, but you can look at this dew claw for dogs, and a lot of times you'll see this claw will have two claws coming out of the same location. I
Mhm.
don't know what the percentage or what the breeds are that has the highest amount of variation on this, but it's very common that you'll see two claws that are coming out right here, which it will already have its four individual palms or pads that you see here. You'll have a claw associated with each pad, and then you'll have your rear pad, which you see on the E pad. This pad doesn't make any contact with anything. It doesn't touch anything. This is just a slow evolution of the of this limb appendage, and the claw isn't working. But the claw in D, it is very common to see two claws appear here just in I don't know if it's a mutation or what it is, but it happens a lot.
Yeah, so generally there's a bunch of homology among mammal limbs. And what that means is if you look at the skeleton of a mammal limb, if you compare two different, like if you take a bat's limb and a cat's limb, it has like all the same parts. They're just different lengths and they're arranged differently. But that is what we call homology in evolution. It's the similarity between body features that comes from the fact that the organisms share common ancestry. They had an ancestor who had this basic body plan, and over time it's been diversified to different uses, as opposed to an analogous feature, which is a feature that's similar, but it doesn't come from common ancestry. It comes from selection pressures shaping body plans into advantageous forms.
Yeah, there's a ton of this on cows, on horses. Sometimes we
Mm-hmm.
see like bone division. We don't have us. We were talking about this earlier with the coccyx, that we kind of get a blending, that we get a singular, bone structure here. But we get this a
Mm-hmm.
lot in that they divide, and we can see components of it in some cattle, and I think there's even some deer that's very well known for it. And I wish I had a picture up here, but they'll have the two-pronged hooves that'll be at the pad area that you'll see here, and
Mm-hmm.
then up in this E section they'll have two extra ones that don't even make contact with the ground sometimes, and they'll form very much like this I guess fifth or sixth pad that doesn't make any contact with the ground.
Yeah, so mammals, you can divide those up into a couple groups, and two groups that are very relevant are the perissodactyls, which are your odd-toed animals, and ungulates, which are even-toed. And interestingly, whales are ungulates. We'll probably end up talking about whales a lot because they have really cool vestigials and atavisms and a really well-assembled evolutionary lineage. But if you look at a whale's its flippers, its front limbs, it has that mammal appendage
Yeah.
skeletal plan. It has little fingers, and it has 26 bones, and they're
Yeah.
almost exactly the same as the 25 bones that a human has in their hands. Super cool.
It makes no sense for that to be inside of the fin
Yes.
outside of evolution. You
Yeah.
just wouldn't need it if you designed it like that. But it
Correct.
is in there because it evolved.
Yeah.
Now, this was one of the subjects that I was talking about earlier that I did. It's not technically listed as a vestigial or a atavism. And I don't know how much you know about these fish that are known as tripod fish. There's a few, they're deep sea fish, and these are elongations that happen on their fins, and they have evolved this way that they can stand on what is basically their fins, and they
Mm-hmm.
perch up a little bit and can get a little bit more current, and they feed on prey. It's not keltids. I'm trying to think what the name of it is, but these are a great subject to look up. But yeah, this is their fins that have simply evolved more and more bony structure. And I read somewhere that some of these are not very, they're flimsy when they want them to be flimsy.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know if they're pressurized with water or what they're pressurized with, but some of these species, they're flimsy when they want to be, and they're structured, they're strong when they don't want them to be. But these fish are not efficient swimmers. They cannot swim very well at all. There's a few YouTube videos on these, but yeah, I don't know what you would call this category, but this is something that they've already used as their regular fins, which they don't hardly swim with now. They've just extended into feet, basically.
So, one of the big breakthroughs in evolution that happened in our lifetime was the discovery of a fossil species called Tiktaalik rose. You may have heard of Tiktaalik before. It was discovered in Canada. And the way it was discovered was, we theorized that if you look at most land organisms today, the vast majority of them are what's called a tetrapod. A tetrapod is something that has four limbs, basically. That's what tetra means, four. Pod means limb or leg. So we theorized that there would be a species somewhere in the fossil record that is partway between an aquatic tetrapod and a land tetrapod. It would theoretically be a fish species that was capable of excursions on land and moving around on land because it had those tetrapod features. It had those fins that could also serve as legs to walk on. And so we started looking for this species and we found it. We found the species. It's called Tiktaalik rosea. It's got a very transitional body plan that indicates that land tetrapods evolved from ocean tetrapods, and it very well might be one of our ancestors. It's possible that it is one of the things that we ourselves derived from, and maybe all land tetrapods, in fact, come from this amphibious ancestor that was capable of using its leg-like fins to move around on land, which was a huge advantage for it because less predators, a totally untapped source of resources that nothing else is competing with it over. So you can see why there was a big advantage to being able to do these excursions on land. And the idea is that over time, populations of these organisms adapted to living on land more and more. And, you know, it went from aquatic to amphibious to land animals. And we think Tiktaalik is one of the transitional forms that was a part of that transition.
This is the one I think that's regularly associated with like mud skippers, right?
Yes, yeah. A mud skipper is another great example. Yeah.
Yep. All right. I don't know how much you know about this one. This thorny stick bug here. I'm trying to think what it's traditionally called. It did have a name for this damn thing, but it is a thorny stick bug, and it has. This is the female version, and the vast majority of stick bugs that adapt to look like sticks in any way, shape, or form, they will have wings. There's a ton of species on this, unlike with the mole rat that we were talking about that only has like 36 species. There are tons of stick bug species, and the vast majority of them have wings, and they have these pads that you'll see on the picture here right on the back. There's these tiny like pads that look like they have a wing underneath them. You have a male and a female version of this. The male being on the left side is slightly thinner. These are drawings on them. I'm sorry, I couldn't get any open source actual pictures of this. But what you have is they have wings that will fully open, whereas the female, they'll have little tiny wings that come out and they can flutter a little bit, but they're not enough to fly. She absolutely cannot fly with them, but she'll flutter them fast, is my understanding. And that she can scare people off, and she can rear them up to make herself look larger. But 100%, none of them are able to fly with these wings. Whereas the male that is slightly smaller, they can fly with theirs.
Yes, this is a great example of how having a feature can still be an advantage, even if you can't use it for what other members of your species or other species use it for. So like in this instance, they're using it as intimidation to ward off predators or threats. Other organisms use it as camouflage or as what's it called? Imitation. Like there's a species that have a pattern on their wings that makes them look like a different organism, and it indicates to potential predators, don't eat me, I don't taste good, you're not going to like me, you know. And it works as a survival mechanism, as a way to avoid predation, even if it can't let you fly through the air. And another interesting example is the order Hymenoptera. The order Hymenoptera is the order in which wasps, hornets, bees, and ants reside. And obviously, wasp, hornets, and bees, most of them get plenty of usage out of their wings. They're able to use their wings to fly. They're actually not that good at flying, is something that we've recently discovered. We used to wonder how they flew. We finally figured it out. They're basically controlled falling. It's a very bumbling, it's not the most graceful form of flight, but it works for locomotion. There are several ant species, however, and they all share common ancestry, that have wings that can't fly at all. There's, I think, something like 20 something species of ants that have wings and they're not capable of flight. but they
Yeah,
still
there were
have
more
them.
stick bugs that couldn't fly either. This was just a good one, and I was able to get a good image. But yeah, from what I was looking online, there's more stick bugs that they can't fly, but they do have wings. They just can't fly with them.
I love the order Hymenoptera. They're fascinating for both entomology and evolution. There's like 200,000 something different species of wasps, hornets, bees, and ants. And not only can you see an interesting suite of physical features that they have due to evolution, their whole societal structure is due to evolution, and there's a wide variety of that too. So you've got species of bees that are mostly solitary. You've got species of bees that are primitively eusocial. You've got species of bees and ants that are social, and you've got species of bees and ants that are pretty advanced in their social behavior, like are capable of having specific roles. They're capable of delegating and teamwork and all kinds of fascinating behaviors that are due to the social structure that they've evolved. And we can watch species change and adapt their social behavior based on environmental pressures in observable time spans, because insects have such swift generation times. You're capable of having like 20, 30 generations of an insect species within a single human lifespan. So we do a lot of
Sure.
evolutionary experiments on them, and we've been able to create some real fascinating changes doing those experiments. One of my favorites is called the Dodd incipient sexual separation of Drosophila experiment. She took fruit flies, and she took one population perfectly interfertile fruit flies, introduced a geographic separation. She put them in different environments, and in group B, she changed their food sources. And after just a handful of generations, like a dozen generations or so, she was able to produce incipient sexual separation, which means the Drosophila species, the two populations were capable of producing offspring together if they selected each other as mates, but they generally would not select each other as mates. And so, because of the way this species concept works, part of what defines what a species is the species behavior and what it will try to mate with. Technically, she produced a repeatable speciation event. If you wanted to, you could go out and purchase a population of Drosophila melanogaster and form a new species out of it in under a year if you wanted to replicate her experiment. And it's so cool. Evolution deniers say, oh, you can't witness evolution happening. No, you can actually. If you have the time and the money to do this experiment, you absolutely can witness evolution happening in real time.
Yeah, we got some species that are on the brink of changes too that we see kind of
Mhm.
variations back and forth. I think there's a fish that China has played with for the longest time that sometimes it'll have eyes and sometimes it won't.
Mhm.
And if you raise a few generations in a dark environment, it'll wind up losing the eyes, and you raise it in. It's not a full, like the eyeball is disappearing or reappearing, but there's functionality change that the bloodline that we have is so close to that it's going one way or another on
Yeah.
active. But anyway,
Yeah, applied evolution is one of the areas of evolutionary science that is most important and impactful. It can help with agriculture, so it can help with food insecurity. It can help with medicine, so it can help with pandemics. I made a list of like all of the biggest problems the planet faces, and applied evolution can help address almost half of the problems on that list. So when evolution deniers say things like, "Oh, evolution isn't important. It's a vanity study. Nobody really needs to study evolution, and evolution doesn't do anything for us." They're completely full of it.
yeah, I mean, COVID alone could cover that subject.
Exactly.
COVID alone could cover that subject.
Yep.
But now moving into the blind mole rats. These are an interesting one. I seen 36 species is what is confirmed that they have their own
Mhm.
set that is named and whatnot. I didn't get a list of them and all, but I understand that there are 36 species and they range a bit in how useful their eyes are. Some of them can see shadows, some of them can see movements of light, some can't. I also wanted to point out, you were talking about hair, like the eyebrows
Mhm.
earlier. Many of these species have very thick hair in the
Mhm.
area that kind of covers the eye to the degree that nothing can get in the eye. So those hairs are being very useful. And you'll see even in the picture here, you have very, very tiny eyes, because these are things that are generally underground and they're digging, and
Mhm.
these eyes are just completely useless. So hair starting to cover that eye is more practical than that eye being exposed. But there are some of these that you can wave your hand in the front of them. They can't even tell that anything
Mhm.
whatsoever is going on. But the eyeball and the socket and all is still there.
A lot of people think these guys are ugly. I think they're absolutely adorable. Look at those little chompers. Oh my gosh. I think they're cute as a button. But yes,
Yeah.
you're correct. The eyes have attenuated. And a lot of people would think, well, that's a disadvantage. Not being able to see is a bad thing. It's de-evolution. They're degenerating. They're not evolving. Well, the thing is, they're not really getting much use out of those eyes. And pretty much every body feature you have has some kind of cost. It requires energy to make it work, it requires protein to build it. So when you're not getting anything out of that feature, not having to fulfill that cost actually is an advantage. I know that's hard for some evolution deniers to kind of wrap their minds around, but yes, it can actually be a benefit to not have to fulfill the energy cost of a feature that's not doing anything for you.
Yeah, it doesn't do a thing in the world. Not for these. I mean, they're just underground constantly. When I was looking at this, I saw an article on one of the Science magazine pages that was talking about this, and we briefly talked about it before, but I wanted to mention it. This magnetic reception, that they can
Mhm.
pick up magnetic fields, and we kind of have the north to south magnetic field flow, that they can now read this and have a bearing somewhat underground of which way is north and which way, so that they can get an orientation even underground. But that's something that's developed, that if you have eyes and you have the ability to move around with eyes, this would have never developed.
Yeah.
There just wouldn't be any need for it. But it is developing, because they don't use their eyes, and it's still pragmatic. Any way that you can orientate yourself in any way, shape, or form, it's practical, and it begins to develop.
It's fascinating to think about the life experience of an organism that has no visual organ, no visual input. It's fascinating to think what their life is like, what their experience is like, what it is like to live in a world of darkness, and to navigate through sensation or through magnetic impulses. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. You know what I think about? I think about a world where these guys became the dominant organism on the planet instead of humans. What would their news broadcasts be like? You know, what would their weather reports wouldn't say it's sunny out today. They'd say it's real warm. Because they have no
Yeah,
detection
yeah,
of the
yeah.
sunlight. It's fun. It's just a funny little stray
Yeah,
thought.
absolutely. Some of this gets a little philosophical, but there's an interesting show that has Jason Momoa in it, where the people are blind
Oh
and they
yeah,
can't
yeah.
see anything. And in the show where they're blind, there's this storyteller that tells a story, and it's a totally different type of art form than we think of.
Mm,
It's all sound art. So they tell a story and they talk about, and the horses come running in and they make this trotting sound. And honestly, to listen to this person's story, it is so well told that the best way to listen to it is to close your eyes.
yeah.
And because this is all audible, and
Mhm.
you're getting a sense of who the person is based on the chains rattling, the chain mail, and all of this different sensation. And this is how they're telling this great story, and people are gathering around. But very interesting. It's a different type of art that is, it's completely it's not at a visual level, it's a subliminal level. But get a
Yes.
little off track
One
here.
one thing learning about biology I think has helped me do a little bit is to make my viewpoints slightly less anthropocentric. We
Yeah.
our viewpoints are always going to be a little anthropocentric at the least because we are humans, but it helps to remember that there's a diversity of life experiences, and we shouldn't always think of humans as the only experience that matters.
For sure. There's an old saying, and I don't remember if it coming from a philosopher or whatnot, that it says, imagine experiencing the world as a bat. It's difficult to even think in a way that you could experience the world as a bat does.
Yeah.
Now, this is one that you sent me, and a subject that I'm sure that you're eager to talk about.
Okay, so this is very cool. So we were touching on it a little bit earlier. There's a whole set of fossil species that we strongly think are the ancestors to modern whales. And this is a big part of the reason we think that. So we have that whole line of fossil species: Indohyus, Pakicetus, Myocetus, Ambulocetus, Basilosaurus, Dorudon. And they show, suites of changes that match a model that says that modern cetaceans evolved from ancient even-toed ungulate quadrupedal land mammals. And one of those pieces of evidence that's really strong is that every whale and every cetacean has vestigial leg bones in their body plan. But some whales and some dolphins end up with an atavistic hind limbs, a set of atavistic hind limbs. And you can see that in the picture on the right there. That is a dolphin that something happened in apoptosis. Those limbs weren't told to stop developing. Normally they would stop developing and get absorbed by the rest of the body plan. Didn't happen in that dolphin. And what that tells us is that the genes for producing a hind limb are still in the whale and dolphin genome. They're just usually not expressed. And the reason they're there is because of their ancestry. And it's really hard to explain that without that ancestry. The ancestry makes perfect sense of it.
Why is this genetics even here? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And basically it forces a viewpoint of, well, God made a world that looks exactly like what you would expect from evolution. At which point your evolution denial becomes epistemologically useless and totally bankrupt. And it's like, okay, sure, we'll just keep pretending like it's evolution then. But yeah, whatever, But that's why I like them.
This is similar
to addition to all the other evidence about whale evolution, all fitting and fitting the different lines, all fitting each other and supporting the same conclusion.
Yeah, I think the whale species, just that all of the whale, the dolphin, they're so interested just because of your lung development, not just this tail thing, but the fact that they breathe with lungs. They don't have a inbound like gills or whatnot that they have, just like the nostril receptors on the human skull. They have slowly but surely moved further and further up the head. I mean, I think the whale is one of the most interesting.
100%.
One of the most interesting of all of them.
They have the nasal cavity. They have hair. They nurse their young underwater. They have placenta, they have amniotic fluid, they have the entire land mammal reproductive body plan. And it's like, why would God throw that into an ocean organism and then all these other fossil species and give us this misleading set of evidence? And I
think that's all of all of the subjects. Hold on, let me take it for a second. I think that's all of the subjects. We're going to continue to talk for a little bit more. I do want to open the stage up for anybody that does want to come in, and we're going to start doing any Q&A in a few minutes. I actually do see that the viewership is a little slower, but that's probably my fault. I brought somebody in to talk about the subject. I am interested in the subject, but the channel is geared towards and has all of the flagging and all the hashtags and everything for philosophy, not for the subject of evolution. So that might be some of the lower viewership that's going on. Do want to apologize on that, but I do want to cover the subject, and I did want to have you That
Absolutely.
having been said, we're going to continue to talk, but anybody that wants to come in and interact with us, you are welcome to do so. It is a pinned comment. Please stop in.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, whale evolution is one of the best lines of evidence for evolution because there's so many different lines of inquiry, and all the findings from those different lines, they match each other and they support the same conclusion of cetacean common ancestry with other ungulate quadrupedal land mammals. And so the basic the different lines of evidence, there's fossil evidence, there's the genetic evidence, and then there's there's another line. There's a couple different lines of evidence, and they all fit each other. So the fossil evidence is the whole line of species: Myocetus, Indocetus, Pakicetus, or Indohyus pakicetus, Basilosaurus, and Dorudon. And what they show is the organisms getting bigger as they're getting more food sources. Like you said, the nasal cavity migrates from the front of the face to halfway up the skull to the top of the skull. We see the front limbs go from land walking to more of a flipper conformation. And we see the hind limbs attenuate. They shrink and shrink and shrink until they vanish completely. So that's the fossil evidence. And then there's the genetic evidence. So we took all that fossil evidence and we took all of the morphological evidence of the whale, and we made a bold prediction. If whales actually evolved from a common ancestor with other ungulate quadrupedal land mammals, we would see a greater similarity between cetaceans and other species of ungulate quadrupedal land mammals than any other species. So we sequenced the whale genome, we sequenced a bunch of quadrupedal land mammals genomes, we sequenced other species genomes, and we ran comparisons. And the species the whale is most similar to is the hippopotamus. And that is a quadrupedal ungulate land mammal. They're very similar to whales. They both have sparse hair. They both have very similar skin and blubber. They both nurse their young underwater, which is fascinating to me. It requires a very specific kind of secretions in order for the young to be able to actually drink the secretion while fully immersed in water. And so the fossil evidence and the genetic evidence both fit each other very well and supported the same conclusion that whales evolved from ungulate quadrupedal land mammals.
So I wanted to introduce Kurt over here. I don't know if you've met Kurt, and I want to say in advance that I generally don't introduce people as doctor unless they have something that's applicable in the field. But this is Dr. Kurt over here. So this does seem applicable in the field, and I'll address him.
Absolutely.
Kurt,
I know,
how's it going, man?
I know Dr. Kurt.
Yeah, I thought that presentation was just outstanding. Very, very well done on both of your parts. Very, very useful. The thing for me is that the whole concept of vestigiality at this point, it's important to get people's minds thinking the right way. But once we know the genes involved, and I don't know if you saw in the chat, but the method of limb reduction, the caecilians, the legless lizards, the snakes, the whales, anything else that gets limb reduction is like a known genetic mechanism that we have a decent understanding of. It's the same type of thing that happens with cavefish that lose their eyes, or other organisms that are just like, you don't want to overspend on something you don't use, right? That's what you were pointing out with the dew claws. The genes answer any question you have. Like, my career started like long before we had genetic analysis or ability to do these comparative genome analyses, but now they're just cheap and inexpensive and people do them all the time.
Yeah.
And what's important to understand is, like, we don't have any question about this. This is not a questionable thing. This is established factual non-controversial in any way. Anybody who's coming at this from a denialist point of view is just somebody who can't bother to read
Outside
a
of the
high
circle
school
of knowledge.
textbook.
Yeah.
They just can't. They just don't know the actual facts of the case. The actual facts don't allow any other interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, Stated Clearly did a great video about the whale line specifically, and that video lives rent free in my head because literally there's like a dozen evolution denial bot profiles that comment on that video nonstop all day, every day. If you go and look at that video right now, I
I bet
guarantee you
their ERV one has more
in the
activity.
last 6 to 12 hours, it's the same accounts posting the same comments over and over again. And most of them are misquotes. They do that thing where creationists take part of a quote and they only tell you the part of the quote and leave out the part afterwards that explain, like the one where Darwin's like, I admit that thinking that the eye evolved is kind of crazy, and then they leave out the part where he explains, and this is why we think that anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to understand that if Darwin didn't exist, if Mendel didn't exist, if Rosalind Franklin and Watson and Crick didn't exist, it doesn't matter to anything that we use today. Nothing that they said matters profoundly to anything that we know today, because we're able to use the modern genetic analyses to reconstruct the entire web of life on Earth and its history with like a first approximation effect, without any reference to theory really even at all. Like we don't have to talk about how selection works to understand the cladistic relationships. They're all just written in the genes.
So I wanted to be clear on something myself of why I picked this subject rather than other subjects. There are multiple branches of science and biology that support evolution, from endogenous retroviruses to gene sequencing to every subject, and how this was originally found by Darwin and by our early writers on the subject. Is it was found almost completely by autonomy, that it was just all comparative anatomy, is how it was found. And I think that there's a disconnect between the average person and their understanding of like genes and understanding more systemic things, whereas visual things that they can look at and they can see comparative anatomy, and it doesn't make any sense. Like when you see claws that don't touch the ground or pads on a feet and they don't even touch, this is something that I think is more impactful in the comparative anatomy than in something like studying endogenous retroviruses and sequencing. I just think it carries more weight with the average person.
Visually. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. But like for people who are accepting Adam and Eve as a true story or think the Earth is 6,000 years old, at this point, I have trouble, but like I've been using these owl caves that go back hundreds of thousands of years in Australia. And they have like an owl leaves a pellet usually once every day, and they have like literally millions of pellets. So if the Earth is only 6,000 years old, like how did all those pellets get there?
Right. Yeah. And it's actually the same case with what's called a limnological archive. They're collections of sediment that occur at the bottoms of rivers and lakes. They're sometimes called varves, and they're seasonal. So you can tell an approximate age of a geographical feature like a lake or river based on this limnological lake archive. It tells you approximately how many seasons these depositions have been occurring for. And in places, there's millions of them. And so we know that some of these lakes, some of these rivers are millions of years old. And it's very difficult to explain using flood geology, since a flood wouldn't allow for those kinds of depositions. Only a normal, relatively calm, still lake or a regularly flowing river would make sense of them. A catastrophic global flood would probably destroy these depositions. If anything, it wouldn't preserve them, and it definitely wouldn't deposit them in the periodic fashion that they are, which perfectly matches geological slow development, seasonal deposition.
Yeah, and just to be clear, owl pellets are not diarrhea; they're vomit. The owl can't
They've
pass
thrown them
all
up.
that rat all the
Yeah.
way through the
Yeah.
tube.
Absolutely. Hey, I wanted to point this comment out. I think this is the best comparison that Mr. Ryan Murphy has here said, that Darwin is to modern synthesis as the Wright brothers are to aerospace engineering. I think that's a very accurate term. I think we still do reverence, though, the Wright brothers in the foundational work that they've done. But it's not as if that we wouldn't have made it to the subject, and it's not as if the principles of aerospace and flight, that they wouldn't all work. So I think this analogy is it's one of the analogies, like they say, every analogy falls apart at some point. This one runs a very long ways.
Yeah, and one of the best ways it runs is that modern organisms have had lots of development, even if they are single-celled, or even if they're not something that has like a complex nervous system or multicellular modularity or anything. Like a sponge that exists today has been evolving for exactly as long as humans have. So these like cells have really functional, like highly honed mechanisms. And what a lot of like ID and creationist talking points are about is like, well, you know, a Boeing 787 needs to have an autopilot. So how do you get an autopilot from just a pair of wings? Right? Yeah. That's like literally the level of argument that they're using. And no. Back early on, the Wright brothers just had some wings and some bicycle wheels. That's all they needed to get functionality at that point. We've refined it a lot since then, and there are a lot of structures that like are necessary for function now that wouldn't have been necessary in the original replicating, persisting lineages.
Look, I'm glad you brought Darwin up. I want to take a second to step up and go to bat for my boy Chucky a little bit. People beat up on Darwin a lot. The evolution deniers say horrible things about him. Oh, he was racist and he was awful and all this. And we have a tendency to kind of let them get away with it because we don't think about it in terms of like Darwin's our prophet and everything he said was. So we're like, whatever, okay, beat up on him. But no, we should stand up for him a little bit. He did make incredible contributions to science. And I think we can do that a little bit. We can do both a little bit by clarifying what Darwin and Wallace's biggest contribution to evolutionary history is. And it is this, in my opinion. Correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, Kurt. So the history of evolution, people debated species fixity versus species immutability long before Darwin was ever even born. There was an ancient philosopher, Anaximander, who theorized that species were mutable and could change based on the fact that he didn't think human infants were hardy enough to survive the savagery of the wild. And so he theorized that humans must have changed into what they are from a more brutal, more primal species. He also thought life came from water. He was well ahead of his time in many ways. So before Darwin and Wallace ever hit the scene, people debated species mutability versus fixity. And one of the reasons we thought mutability was a possibility is because we could see random mutations. There are certain random mutations that are very salient, very visible, like albinism and melanism, for instance. You can see those with your eyes. You can look and see that thing is darker or that thing is lighter than all of its, you know, all members of the other species, members of the species generally are. So that's a visible random mutation. But what we didn't understand, we couldn't see how random changes could add up to novel features or entirely new body plans. So people debated that long before Darwin and Wallace hit the scene. What Wallace and Darwin did for us was they explained how a series of random changes could add up to novel features or fundamentally new body plans. And the explanation was natural selection, which is not random. So you got random changes, and then you have a non-random selective process that preserves some of those changes and eliminates others. And that is how random changes can add up to fundamentally new features and entirely new body plans. That was Darwin and Wallace's major contribution, which was a big contribution, and it is still kind of a part of the model, but it's grown a lot. It's developed a lot. We've added new things to it, like evolutionary developmental biology, embryological development. Microbiology probably plays a bigger role than Darwin could have ever known, because he didn't know much about microbiology. He didn't even know DNA was a thing, or he didn't know how heritability worked. He knew that heritability was a thing. He didn't understand the mechanism that caused it was a hereditary molecule. So he got things wrong, but that one contribution was an important contribution. So in that way, he was important, but he's not the god of evolution. He's not our evolutionary prophet. He showed us natural selection, which is just one of like 4 or 5 different forces that are pivotal to evolution.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, is natural selection matters at the level of like organisms that look and act like us. And while you can call it natural selection, and I think that's reasonable, like in the end, it's like an explanation, and that explanation is less important than the facts of the case, right? When you watch a baseball game, you can say, oh, this pitcher won this game for this team, and you're probably right if like the statistics bear that out. That's certainly one really good explanation. But the reason that his team won is because they scored more runs than the other team. That's always the only reason that his team won, is because they scored more runs than the other team. And the only reason that a lineage persists is because it had reproduction that persisted until today. Like that's the only actual explanation, and all the other explanation is just auxiliary. What matters is that there's lineage persistence, and if there's lineage persistence, then you can make stories about it, just like sports writers do about who won the game. But the actual fact is it persisted with the structure that it has now. And when you see it that way, then you stop worrying. I think one of the problems with Darwin's term natural selection was it gives uninitiated people an idea there's an agent of nature that's doing the selecting that is misleading, and it makes them want to immediately say, well, isn't God nature then? And that gives people a lot of confusion.
I agree, Kurt. The reason that I think that was preferential at the time, though, is the only thing that he could compare it to, because people couldn't understand these larger systemic models. The only thing that they could understand is you have a farming culture that was able to select something and able to get to a place by simply selecting one thing and eliminating another. So I think that was kind of the ideal that people understood, like farming selection. They understood, while it wouldn't have been called genetic selection, but that lineage selection. So now he's just saying that nature is doing that thing. And I think it just appealed more to that group, but did it add some confusions? Yeah, sure. It did. I just think that to the farming group and to the farming culture of the time, that's the only way they could have understood the larger kind of systemic thing. And some of these are, what do you call, like micro bits or sound bites, so to speak, that many people would not have even read the whole book. If you read the whole book to start with, they might have understood it. But a lot of them are just seeing snippets from news clippings and whatnot that were coming out about Darwin, drawing him as a monkey and everything else that was going on.
Yeah, can we maybe then say that the term natural selection is a vestigial feature of evolutionary theory?
How about it's a proximal cause as opposed to the distal cause? But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right. But if we focus on what actually takes place and try to remove as much agency from the language as possible, I think it helps people see what's going on. It does,
absolutely. That's why I prefer the term selective breeding over artificial selection.
Scott had a question on here about this vestigials and atavisms as in-process elimination, or is it not worth the cost any longer to get rid of them? I think anything that has a purpose, like the wings that we mentioned earlier, and I'll throw it back up on there for just a moment. Those aren't going to go anywhere. I wouldn't imagine, as long as it's beneficial. If it's beneficial enough that it is keeping the species alive, or it's pragmatic to them, it is a weight, I guess, of the amount of energy that it costs. But I can't imagine things just disappearing completely if they're useful.
Kurt, maybe you can help me out with this, because I'm a little I'm like I'm chewing around the edges of it. Are you familiar with Kondrashov?
I'm sorry, no, not at least
Okay.
the way you're pronouncing it. I don't.
So there's this idea of a fitness value, and the fitness value is what is going to determine what happens there. If a fitness value is above a certain level, that trait is not likely to be filtered out by selection. If it's below a certain value, it is likely to be filtered out. And Kondrashov put the math together for that. And he did so because he was trying to figure out why subtly deleterious mutations haven't added up to catastrophic effects. Theoretically, we are accumulating these mutations that are subtly deleterious. They're not deleterious enough to impose a reproductive or survival disadvantage, but they are a net negative for the host organism. So theoretically, these things could pile up and pile up and pile up, and you'd end up with a population collapsing because it has so many subtly deleterious mutations. The compounding negative of it is enough to cause the population to not be viable. And so he asked this question and wondered why subtly deleterious mutations haven't added up and killed us 100 times over. And he came up with some theories about it, and he used the math to figure it out. So it would depend on just how much of a fitness value that specific vestigial presents, is my understanding of it. And what's interesting is that if you get subtly deleterious mutations that have, concerted effects, like say your lungs are less elastic, that's one subtly deleterious mutation. You're not going to be as good at breathing. It's not enough to cause a survival and reproductive disadvantage. But say then another subtly deleterious mutation comes along that makes your trachea or your esophagus a little bit narrower. Well, that also negatively affects breathing. So the idea is, if you get enough of those, it gets to a point where selection will start removing those things. Negative selection does kick in at a certain point. That was Kondrashov's theory. So it depends on how the vestigial is interacting with other traits, and it depends on how much of what the fitness value of that vestigial is. So I hope that answers your question, Scott.
Yeah, that's a really useful concept, and if he's got a mathematical predictive model that he's used to make assessments, that sounds valid to me. But for me, the key point is that people focus a bit more on mutation than they probably ought to, because a lot of this is just modular repurposing of existing structures or reactivation of previously deactivated structures, such that we now know that gene duplication, horizontal gene transfer, lateral gene transfer, even within a given organism, is a huge mechanism for the development of diversity, such that even if a given set of traits has repetitively deleterious micro mutations that are happening, there will be comparable reactivations or micromutations that lead to selective benefit in other spots stochastically in the genomes, so that then the net negative effects may or may not on an individual or even population level be noticeable.
You are correct. Mutation is a relatively rare phenomena, and especially extremely impactful mutations are way even more rare than that. I mention it because the mutation load paradox is a good problem for evolution to work on and,
No,
steadily
absolutely.
solve.
But I do think that, like, one thing that much theory has failed to take into account until the last 5 or 10 years is the concept of the holobiont. I don't know if you're familiar with
I'm not.
aphid biology, but aphids would not be able to survive
Oh,
because
yes. Yeah.
they don't make their energy sources replete, right? They'll never run out of energy, but they lack amino acids
Mhm.
that are critical for reproduction within the sap of the plants that they suck the sap out of. So what's happened is that they have an obligate intracellular um, symbiont called
Mhm.
Buchnera. That's a just a bacterial parasitic type thing in the same way that mitochondria work.
Mhm.
That knows that has the genes that allow for the formation of those amino acids that the aphid needs from the substrate that's available in the sap, but it has to do that like genetic modification
Yeah.
within each aphid group such that there are now no aphid groups that don't have the Buchnera. Well, if we
Mhm.
just did a genetic analysis of the aphid, then we wouldn't get what's really going on. And I think
Right.
in microbiology, we have all these organisms that are fastidious, right? That we say can't grow in culture.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is because they're growing in a web, an associative web, where other organisms offload their metabolic problems.
Yeah.
And so, like, humans are a uniquely good generalist species, right? We can handle just about any set of calories you throw at us
Mhm.
and be able to reproduce. But the big question is, like, what's happening with the holobiont, and that's where everything is getting really, really interesting, right? Because if we then
Totally.
look at these cooperative interactive webs like lichens or moss or termites or all these organisms or
I was
ants
just going to
that
mention
depend on
termites.
these other organisms, then what we see is that the Darwinian mechanism is not actually a major driver of
Mhm.
like new lineage colonization of a niche, right? What usually happens to allow a lineage to colonize a new niche is a new symbiotic relationship with a different organism type. Arguably, with us, that happened even with dogs, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. You can't ignore the ecology of any organism.
Sorry, I had my mic muted.
Nothing
Sorry.
exists in an ecological vacuum. Yeah, we can answer this question here.
Yeah, let's try to
So
do that.
it is my contention that morals and intelligence are a huge evolutionary advantage, and I can even see how the evolutionary ontology of these things might have played out, because I do not believe that humans are the only rational organisms. I think other organisms are capable to some extent of rational thought. And you can see the beginnings of a moral code, of a moral framework, in the way uh group organisms that exist in groups, your herd organisms, like an example I like to use is, like, think about an early primate tribe or a chimpanzee tribe. Suppose, like, one of those chimpanzees realizes, hey, this bigger male, I can't steal food from him. If I steal food from him, he's going to kick my ass, basically. But this smaller male over here, I'm bigger than him, so I can beat him up and take his food. So I beat up the smaller male and I take his food. But then the next time I'm sleeping, he poops on me from a tree while I'm asleep. So, okay, maybe I don't steal food from the smaller male either, unless I think I can get away with it without anybody seeing me. And so you can see how that is kind of a moral framework. It's saying,
Yeah.
if I steal, there's going to be bad consequences. So don't steal from the big male who can beat me up. Don't steal from the small male who's clever enough to pee on me while I'm sleeping. And that is kind of a rudimentary moral framework. And as your brains improve, as we get more calories, we get bigger brain pans, our moral framework can become more complex to fit the complexifying society that we exist within. And so intelligence and morals, I think, are absolutely evolutionary advantages. I'll tell you one thing, though. Intelligence has a really high energy cost. We spend a lot of our calories keeping our big fat brains working well. And it does have a high energy cost. So it might not be as great of an advantage as we think, but it is still an advantage. And the high energy cost might help explain why it doesn't evolve over and over again, why it has evolved to the level it has uniquely in us.
Yeah. I want to say just right out the gate, before you get into the individual components of morality, it seems that there's an overarching systemic question in this subject, which is it more beneficial to have larger in-groups? And that seems to be the biggest question to the subject. And if we could say it is more beneficial for survival to have larger in-groups, then we already know that larger in-groups are being rewarded over and over. And you can see this with not just with human species, but whether we're talking about ants or whether we're talking about wolf packs. And I used wolf packs in this subject before because there is a cooperation issue that goes on with any species that has its own kind of autonomy and wants certain things, and it wants those even at the cost of, you know, whatever moral or whatever structural thing that's going on. They want I want that food, and they'll fight other dogs or they'll fight other things for it. But there has to be group cohesion to the degree that that's practical for if you have a pack of 2 wolves, that once they get 3 wolves or 4 wolves, they break apart. They're not going to be as successful as something that can get as high as a 6 or 7 or even 10 wolf pack. And the only way that you can have that pack of wolves that large is because you're going to have group cooperation. And at that point, it doesn't really matter what the unspoken ideals of group cooperation are. Are there going to be hierarchies where you'll have alphas in a situation like that, and they kind of dictate, you know, who gets foods what first or whatnot? Sure, but even like pissing in others' territory or doing certain things, there's certain behaviors that you're going to have to recognize for group cohesion, and that is a type of morality that's happening just to have a larger group. And what's being happening over and over, especially in early tribes, is when you have tribe battles, that this tribe is battling against that tribe, and it's early man. The ones that can have enough group cohesion that they can have larger and larger groups, they are going to be more successful because they can have a larger group and they can have more diversity inside of that group. And what is super weird to me is that we see this at literally every scale, all the way up to World War I, World War II, where we see a group that it eliminates the other people in diversity, and it says, no, just people like this. And it competes against people that are more inclusive and more group orientated and say, no, let's all get together. And then we see this in the Axis and the Allies. And even in World War II, we refer to them in that sense, the Axis and the Allies, because those two weren't allied together. They were just fighting against a common enemy, but they didn't ally. And then we have the group that is an alliance, that there is diversity there, but they've decided to all stick together. And over and over, the people who have a larger in-group, they just win. They just win over and over and over. And it's not new. It went all the way up to World War II. So I think that group cohesion is just extraordinarily successful.
It's a great question because it can seem kind of unintuitive that sacrificing yourself could have an evolutionary impact, because that means you're not getting your genes into the next generation.
Yeah, I would also like to point out that theists love to talk about noun forms of adjectives as if they're things. But morality and intelligence are noun forms of adjectives. A person does not have like actual something that we can look at that is their intelligence. They act intelligently in certain circumstances, or they make intelligent claims or make intelligent statements. They may act morally or they may act immorally, right? Those are the actual valences that we have. And therefore, if we see actions that we describe as intelligent in other creatures or describe as moral in other creatures, which I think is like almost impossible to deny, then those things are not unique to humanity. And therefore, there's like really nothing special about them per se. But much more importantly, like we don't perceive in our brains something that's good morally with a different lens or different salience structures in our brains that determine what we judge that about, then we do something that's a good sandwich or a good plate of pasta. Our brains make those evaluations on a global scale, brain wide, and they put an output that we then in English describe as moral. But even other languages don't necessarily use those terminologies. And the idea that you can have a good shoe or a good set of tires means that obviously there's like no clear-cut distinction between moral assessments and other assessments. And again, the same thing with intelligence, right? We use that word a lot because we think it's a big deal in our culture, but intelligence is really just a shorthand for good at school.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people think that humans are categorically different, that we're like it's something above other organisms, and I do not think that is the case. I think every single species of organisms is unique. They all have something that make them, slightly different from every other species, and hence the reason we even need different nomenclature for these different types of organisms. I don't think there's anything that makes any organism like categorically different from other organisms. And when it comes to humans, the things that humans tend to say are the things that make us different or make us above. I've never seen a monkey build a car. I've never seen a lion write a philosophy book. And it's like, yes, kind of. Okay, I kind of see where you're coming from. But that is just a feature that other organisms totally have. Monkeys do have intelligence and the ability to use tools. Tigers do have intelligence and even some degree of intelligent communication with one another. We have a quality that isn't unique in the animal kingdom. It's the degree of that quality that's unique in
Just
us.
more of
We're really good at making tools and
Yeah,
philosophy.
the example I give is an elephant could say that no other creatures really have noses because they can't uproot trees with them. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't really have a nose unless you can uproot a tree with it.
Right. That's a good comparison.
perfect. Yeah, I do think that there's something going on in our scale of in grouping that we can in group at. Clearly, I mean, bacteria. I wouldn't even call that in grouping. Just the group cooperation. I think our intelligence has allowed us to, though not always successful, in all of our biases and all of these different races, ideologies, whether they're ideologies or whether they're something more instinctual, something like a birds of the feather. I think that they have slowed us down in it, but I think that we have innate characteristics that are propensities, and then we are able to override certain propensities more with the logical aspects that we have. And we can say, well, I have an emotional aspect and I have a logical aspect, and we, unlike many animals, we can lean away from that more carnal kind of thing, and subsequently we can build larger and larger in groups and more cooperation that I think for the most part you won't really see that in the rest of the mammal kingdom or the kingdom at all.
Yeah.
No, there's a eusocial mammal that's the naked mole rat, and in fact, they're much more truly eusocial than we are, in that they have a queen who's the only one who's allowed to reproduce. They have like major cooperation. They even have like infant care shared among the organisms. They care for other mole rats that get injured. Like there's a whole set of structures, but we are becoming close to that sort of eusociality yet. We don't have queens yet who are the only ones who can reproduce, which is probably good for us for what we like. But yeah, our number of people that we can pack together is much greater than just about any other mammal at the moment.
So there's an interesting phenomena that I think is somewhat relevant to this. It's the phenomena of bizarre adoptions. So this is something that happens in nature sometimes. I've seen a couple of videos about it. Things where like a
Bonobos.
predator, like a cheetah, adopts a gazelle as a baby. You know, it finds a gazelle baby, and something about that gazelle baby imprints on this cheetah, and the cheetah imprints on the gazelle, and the cheetah starts caring for the gazelle baby like it's its own young, which is extremely contradictory to its usual behavior. It's raising a member of a species that it usually eats for sustenance as if that was one of its young. So I think it speaks to something in organisms. Maybe it's neoteny, you know, this tendency to want to take care of things that have
Yeah.
infant-like qualities, or maybe that cheetah ate some shrooms and it was tripping out or something. I can't explain the behavior perfectly, but it does seem to imply some level of morality, some level of empathy. You know, the cheetah, otherwise the cheetah would just eat that baby, right? Like, so it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
common behavior, but it's an interesting anomaly that can kind of speak to us about what is occurring within that animal's consciousness.
Well, I
So
think there's a way to think about this in general, right? So there's always, if as far back as you want to go, there's competition when energy
Hmm.
is scarce and resources are scarce, and there's cooperation that can allow like greater usage of energy or greater access to resources. Like I was talking about with the aphids, right?
Mhm.
So in a tough situation or in a replete situation where there's loads of energy, there's going to be experimentation on the
Yeah.
part of the living organisms with both competition and cooperation. And this is probably just an example of that. Like, how did dogs and humans start working together? How did cats
Mhm.
become domesticated? How did cattle become domesticated? Probably through this same sort of thing. And so
Yes.
there's probably something that drives an organism to say, hey, maybe we can figure something out here. Let's see how it works. It's like VC startups for organisms.
Yeah, totally. I would love to do more research into that.
hey, Kurt, I threw that on the screen and I realized we hadn't solidified next week whether we're going to talk about the subject of the origin of Yahweh, or if you had another subject that
Yeah,
you were
no,
interested
I'm good with that topic if that's what you want to do.
Fantastic.
But I just am not 100% sure about the noon time frame,
Okay.
which I'll have to nail down. But I think I can. I think I can do it.
Well, let me know. I'm not totally opposed to some moving around. If I need to move
Yeah,
it
if
an
we can
hour,
start
I
at
can just
1, I
go that
can
way.
100% tell you I can do
Okay.
that.
Okay. That sounds good. So we had a question on here earlier, and I'm sorry to say this is I'm not sure if because it's maybe generally considered outside of my wheelhouse, or just because my subscriptions are so damn low and I need to get more up. That's not the one. But I think the subject of evolution it's just not a great driver for this channel. Maybe I'm just not geared for it as much. There, is that the one? No, that's not the one. Oh yeah, death. The idea that death. I think this is just hilariously stupid, but I have heard it come up before. Obviously, evolution doesn't select until it just stops at the point of rebreeding. It doesn't care when you die. So the success of evolution is only that you're able to get to the level of offsprings. That's the only thing that dictates it. You could die immediately thereafter, and evolution couldn't care less. In fact, there are some bugs
As long as your offspring survive, right?
right,
So
as long as your offspring
similarly,
survives. Yeah.
Yeah, similarity in many organisms is common, which means that the organism reproduces and then immediately dies.
Yeah.
So I have heard all kinds of crazy claims from evolution deniers about what evolution should do, and they're all kind of ridiculous. I've heard evolution deniers claim that humans should be evolving to be fully amphibious. Like humans should have gills and fins and flippers because so much of the planet is covered by water. Or and now this evolution should eliminate death. Absolute nonsense. That's not how. I mean, evolution isn't some kind of magical wizard that makes an organism perfect. Evolution is the currency of evolution is good enough to survive and reproduce.
Good enough, baby.
Exactly.
That's its motto.
And-
Evolution's motto. Good enough, baby.
One of
To
the
be
great
clear,
examples is the peacock. And this is another great story that kind of humanizes Darwin a little bit. Darwin hated peacocks. He hated them. He once wrote in his diary, "It makes me sick when I look at it," because he couldn't figure out how evolution would select this big, clunky, gaudy tail feather. It doesn't help it fly, doesn't make it more aerodynamic. It definitely doesn't help with camouflage. Everything about it seems like it should be a net negative and that evolution should select against it. But eventually he realized when you're a 30-pound peafowl that lives in an environment full of 500-pound predatory felines, getting to pass your genes off before you get eaten, that is success. And the big gaudy tail feather helps them do that. It helps them lay down enough pipe that it cancels out any potential disadvantage it provides to survival. And it's interesting. The peacocks are the big, beautiful ones. The males are the big, beautiful ones with the big, colorful, gaudy feathers. And the peahens, the females, are brown, drab, and not eye-catching at all.
right?
Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying something, Kurt.
No, my issue is that the idea of sexual selection is definitely real, and that's real selection, right?
Mhm.
And getting back to morality and intelligence, it's entirely within the realm of possibility that within humans, like verbal ability is almost always one of the most important mate traits from both males and females. Like having a good set of morals is something that people will always say that's something they're looking for in a mate. These could just be sexual selection traits like antlers for us.
Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah, you don't hear a lot of people saying, "I'd really like to meet a sociopath." You know, somebody who's just going to fucking ruin my life and steal my money. And yeah. No, you're totally right. Oh, man.
Well, for sure, boobs are a huge selection thing. That we select.
Oh, and one other thing, Austin, like technically we're vertebrates, we're fish, we're amphibians, we're synapsids, we're mammals, we're monkeys, we're apes. We would like in cladistics, we're all those. So we don't need to evolve to become amphibians. We already are them.
Right.
Yep.
I love the category of fish.
Osteoichthyes body plan. Yeah.
All is fish. All is fish.
Yeah. No, I remember what I thought now. I need to make a meme of Darwin as the crying, raging soy jack and a peacock as the handsome Chad with the nice chin.
What's funny about
Be a
that?
funny meme.
What's funny about that is when they do that evolution should do this or should do that, and it acts as if evolution is magic. The hilarious thing that I like to say is, do you really expect evolutionary model to do more than God? Is that what you're really expecting? Like you want it to outperform God. So if God is your model and he didn't do these things, and people die sometimes in pain and misery, their eyes, they have to have glasses or whatnot. This is God's work, but you think evolution and another model should outperform it? How ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, to get it back to the philosophy point of the channel, maybe to get to the original ideas and try to spread the idea. Like, there is a really good theological problem that evolution exposes, which is that on the standard like Christian and Muslim understanding of the earth, the God had already created beings who had free will, who could choose to love him or choose to reject him, that weren't made of matter or material. So, what is the added value of making things out of matter if those other beings already had the free will and the ability to make choices and to love him or reject him? Like, where was the value added in creating beings made out of matter? On theology, to me, I still don't know what the explanation would be. Whereas on atheology, yeah, the only way you're going to get a being is out of matter. That's the
Mhm.
that and the
Yeah.
cost we pay of being made from matter is car crashes and cancer and diabetes and all the things that associate with misapplication or like mistakes in how our physical material is made up.
Yeah, the
Let me say
only
this:
beings that we know for sure are possible are the
our
ones that
matter.
have a physical substrate.
Sure. Now, at a theological level, what I think that's a very interesting one, but I have made the point before that even more than that, why matter? Why
Mm.
matter at all?
Yeah.
Because if it in the end is going to revert back to, which is many theologies, that we're going to be not in a material substrate, but that we're going to return as a spirit or whatnot,
Mhm.
then why do the matter trick at all? Especially when you pose that God is capable of creating or doing all things, then you could just get something like the next Thursday or last Thursday idea, that instead of
Mhm.
creating things like this, however you want them, just create them like that. And you didn't even need to create a material world to start with. If the whole
Right.
ideal is that we're going towards, we're going to be selected as a bride and then we're going to come up as a spirit, why not just start there? Why run through the
Mhm.
gauntlet? And there's only two good explanations for that. And one is that God isn't all powerful, and that the systemic pressure of evolution and the processes of material are able to create something that God can't
Mm.
just holistically create, or the God thing's just not, it's just not the case. It
Yeah,
seems
on
to be the two
the
best explanations.
on
Yeah.
the dichotomy between Madonna's material girl and Sting's spirits in the material world, I'm definitely on Madonna's side.
For sure, for sure.
So I'm just going to rewind a little bit and to the previous point about asking for evolution to do impossible or irrational things. We all know this argument. We've all heard this one before from evolution deniers. If we evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? We've all heard that one. I've also heard it kind of changed a little bit into, why aren't monkeys still evolving into humans? And
Mhm.
I like these questions because they're almost intelligent. They almost manage to ask something that makes some sense, but it's always like really, really easy to see why the question is wrong. And in that
Yeah.
case, it's very obvious why monkeys and other primate species aren't evolving into humans. The dominant species on the planet has already filled that niche. So
Yeah.
there's not much
If
of a
some
selective
Americans
pressure.
came from England, why are there still English people?
I like
Uh,
the better one, y'all. My favorite one is actually the wolf and the dog, because at least many people accept that dogs
mhm.
they were bred into what they are now. But then the question is, if there are dogs, why are there still wolves? So it just I like that one the best. It seems to fit, and it seems to resonate with people the most. Like, yeah, that totally would be stupid. Wolves shouldn't just disappear because we've bred dogs. So makes no sense.
It's like thinking you should disappear because your sister had a baby. It's not
Yeah.
really how things work. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, there's lots of comparisons you could make. Why is there still England if America came from England? Why is there still blues if rock evolved from blues? Why is there still Latin if all these other languages evolved from Latin? And it's like the language one, I think, is especially interesting because there's no point at which a Latin speaker gave birth to a Spanish speaker. It was a
Yeah.
gradual change, much like evolution. And
yeah,
you can
absolutely. It's such a great way to explain what goes on, because people always want to say, well, when would a duck give birth to a goose? It never.
Yeah.
Every organism would look like a mixture of new characteristics and the older characteristics that its parent had, just like happens with all the humans.
Totally.
There's an interesting pious argument that comes up in this subject all the time, and they take it from a pious position to say, well, I didn't come from no monkeys, and as if that there's some level that makes them better by not doing this. And what's interesting is it seems morally that the adverse would be the case if you didn't come from monkeys, then you come from generations of inbreeding. Is what you, I mean, I don't know what the other alternative is. If you're talking about an Adam and Eve thing, then you're talking about brothers and sisters breeding with one another, and then cousins, and just generationally, which not only
Twice
do we
though, because
know,
it's not just Adam and Eve. You got Noah and his kids.
Right. Again, it happens the second time. So not only do you now, as far as all this piety, I didn't come from that. Well, no, then you come from all these generations of inbreeding, which we already now know that all of this inbreeding winds up creating autisms. It creates all these mental disabilities and whatnot. So is it truly the case that you would rather take the pious position this way rather than this way, and autisms and everything else that has worked its way in? It just seems illogical to take the pious position, because it doesn't matter what your emotions are on the subject either way. Reality is unconcerned and undeterred with that.
It's not only morally reprehensible, it also is just mathematically and genetically inconceivable. There is a certain number of consecutive generations of inbreeding that beyond which the population is guaranteed to collapse. You cannot have that many generations of inbreeding in a row and still produce a stable, viable offspring. It's good.
I'm going to say no. I think you can. Deloid rotifers have been parthenogenic for at least as long as we've been observing them. And like, there's just no genetic diversity going on at all, and they do great. So it just depends on the circumstances and the environment and the niche of that particular organism. There's like a lineage of ambystoma salamanders that are almost entirely parthenogenic, but they, like, I think 1 out of every 100 will like inject a sperm pack and have one of like 4 different male salamander from different species, like add a little genetic diversity to their lineage. It's really hard to say that those things are necessarily negative for all organisms, but for humans, they do seem to be negative.
Absolutely.
The Habsburg didn't do great.
That's what I love about biology. There's always some weird exception somewhere. They say physics has laws, chemistry has rules, and biology has exceptions. And it's very true.
It's because it's energy flow through a system, right? So as long as you can make the energy flow work and you find a way around the problems, then you can persist. And that's why life is always fuzzy at the edges. No single definition ever fully gets at all the different candidates.
Totally.
And it's because it's just a way of organizing entropy.
Totally.
So let me do a little bit of a wrap up here. My primary guest that's been on here for today is Mr. Austin Sims. His YouTube channel is listed. We will also attach this. You can check him out. He makes videos. He's been our primary guest today and speaker. And Kurt doesn't have a channel. I think you're primarily found at Breakfast Tacos. Regularly speaking,
I think the name of the channel now is Mega Bloodbath.
He's regularly involved in mega bloodbaths over there at Breakfast Tacos.
You pronounced it wrong, Robert. It's pronounced Mega Bloodbath.
My apologies. But that having been said, Kurt, any last words on anything on this subject?
I hope they're not my last words
on this subject today. Austin, then any last thoughts?
So I do, and it's a thought I repeat frequently at the end of streams like this. Evolution is important for understanding who you are, understanding the world we live in, understanding that our brains are limited and we need to use tools to get the best usage out of them. And this is why it's important to get good information about evolution out there. And I also believe that evolution denial ties into this whole vast web of conspiracy thinking and misinformation and disinformation pushing channels. And it ties through these shady back doors into right-wing politics. And it's important to resist it, because one of the worst things that it does is it takes children and it scoops their brains out and it throws their brains into this mind fuckery blender and turns it on to the highest setting, and it's ruining potential, it's ruining opportunities, it's ruining the brain stock we need for the next generation of thinkers who will move society along, who will make innovations and improve human existence. So it's important to understand evolution. It is important to talk about it. It is important to tell people they're wrong when they spew nonsense about it. And so there is a cultural impact. And so that's why I do what I do. And I hope more people will start adding their voice to this and using their power.
Yeah, keep
Excellent.
doing it, Austin. You're doing a great job.
Thank you, Kurt.
Well said. That having been said, I thank you everybody for joining. Next Saturday, we will be having a live stream. Me and Kurt are going to be talking about the subject of the origin of Yahweh and how that whole belief structure kind of come about, and try to track its history a little bit. I thank you everyone for joining. I encourage you all to remain skeptical, be skeptical of other people's, and be skeptical of your own thoughts. Thank you for joining, and have a lovely day.